Welcome to the February 22nd, 2022 special meeting of the Human Services Advisory Board. I'm calling the meeting to order at 7:04 p.m. Okay, thank you for attending. I will now call the roll for the record of the board members' attendance. Joanne Parsons here. Mary Earls. Can y'all say here? Okay. Monica Gonzalez.
Here.
Alfreda Lee.
Here.
Eleanor O'Shan.
Here.
Megan. I'm sorry, Melina.
Here.
Okay. Gloria.
Here.
And then Megan Campbell.
Here.
So with 8 members out of 7 voting members in attendance, we have a quorum. Staff, is anyone present in person, online, or by phone to speak during the citizens' comments period?
No.
Okay. And then we will now consider approval by motion of the February 15th, 2022 meeting minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve? And the motion's made by?
I approve.
Okay, thank you, Gloria.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, is that Alfreda?
It was Monica.
Okay, Monica, I'm sorry. Okay. Does the board have any discussions or corrections regarding the minutes? All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All against, say nay.
Aye.
The motion to approve carries. The next action item to discuss and take action on recommendation resolution 2022-01-RR to consider revising City of San Marcos, Texas Code of Ordinance, General Ordinances, Chapter 2, Administration, Article 3, Board of Committee and Commissions, Division 9, Human Services Advisory Board regarding composition of board membership. At this point, the board will decide whether or not the non-voting social worker board position should be changed, and if so, to what extent. I'm opening the floor for comments and discussion. Megan, when we left off the last time, I think you were wanting to give us some, I guess, your recommendation on if we should still have this position, and also if it should stay non-voting or a voting position. Do you want to continue that?
Sure. I can kind of share some of my thoughts. To be totally honest with you, I have thoughts on both sides that I kind of want to just share with you all and then get your perspective. I'll start with why I think that it could be a valuable role to continue. I think I also want to say, again, I won't be on the board, so nothing that is decided is going to hurt my feelings. I think that this role could be valuable in helping to inform future board members about what human services and social services and typical grant processes look like in the field. Social workers are held to a certain code of ethics and sort of ethical professional practices that I think it could be valuable for future iterations of the board to have some sort of like presentation about prior to, reviewing applications. I know folks often join boards because they're wanting to be involved in the city, but they may not necessarily know about how social services work and what standard practices are. And so I think if this role were to continue, finding a way to make the non-voting role provide some form of education rather than, in my experience so far, we've had a hard time kind of figuring out what my role has been. And so I had a hard time kind of navigating when it was appropriate for me to speak up and when it wasn't. So if this position were to move forward, I would recommend that there be some sort of structured, maybe time at the beginning of the session where this role gives some sort of basic presentation to the board members about the field and social services and some basic kind of terminology and things, best practices, etc. I also think, though, on the converse, some of the challenges I think of having a social worker on the board that potentially has a vote is that, let's say, for example, I am a social worker that works for the children's shelter in town, and my program has an MOU, which with another organization that's applying for funding. An MOU between nonprofits is like a contract. It's a memorandum of understanding. And there's not finances necessarily tied to MOUs, but it's like an agreement. If this position were to be one that is voting, that could get confusing. I think for that role, which is why I imagine they created it to be a non-voting role, because I do think there's something valuable that a social worker could bring in informing this board, but it could get sticky if this person is a professional here in the community and works with some of the other organizations that are applying for funding. So that's kind of my two perspectives on it. And not to put Eleanor on the spot, but I know Eleanor is also a social worker in the community. So I'm curious if Eleanor, you have any thoughts? Not to put you on the spot, but.
Oh, no, not at all. And I don't have a social work degree. So I think that separates us, but I will say, and I am not going to be on the board next year either. And I will say that working with some of the other organizations and being in the position that I'm in at the food bank, it's been a struggle for me to, even if it's not per se a conflict of interest, I've felt very conflicted about a lot of it, just the process because of my ties with the other organizations that I work with. That being said, I do think that it's valuable to have a social worker, social services person, or somebody that's very familiar with the way that nonprofits work on the board, probably as a non-voting member, to kind of help and give information like Megan was saying. I mean, it's been a great experience and I've learned so much and learned a lot just from the other organizations, and it's been a great experience, but it has caused me to have, to feel conflicted a lot of times because I do work with these people on a regular basis. So, but I agree with everything Megan had to say.
I agree too, that we should have a social worker, non-voting, because I like what Megan brought to our attention, that sometimes it can be a conflict, especially if they have an MOU. And see, I had never heard of that before. And so just bringing that to our attention gives us more of understanding of what the social worker is supposed to do as well. And then having a presentation before, just to let us know who you are, what you're about, and to give like a social worker an overview of something. I think that would be great too, so that we can have a better understanding of how these organizations work and how they are supposed to work, since we're the ones that are going to be funding them or not funding them. So I agree with both Megan and Eleanor. Does anybody else have any comments? Or if you do not agree and you don't think that we need a social worker or whatever, anybody have anything to say before we vote?
I agree. Having a representation from social work is very important. It represents our community and current services that are being offered that they work with. However, I do see the conflict that can occur, but we do have a mechanism in place for a voting member to have a conflict of interest filed if they feel that there would be a conflict. But I would also maybe propose we can have two people from the social work environment, one that's a non-voting, and then to balance all that conflict that maybe one person may have someone that is a voting member. So you would have both a voting and a non-voting member from that same field of work. And then that way it can kind of balance and not be a very biased view on certain issues if one might have more of a conflict or another. I also wanted to see, are we very specific as to how we define the occupation of the non-voting member? Through my work experience, I have learned that there is a difference between the sociology department and the social work, School of Social Work. So are we very specific that they need to be a licensed social worker or experience in social work, or can they be someone who has a degree in sociology? Could we expand maybe a non-voting member to retired faculty or staff from universities, or retired social worker in general? Do they have to be currently practicing? Those are
Currently,
questions.
don't they have to be a social worker, be a licensed social worker? Isn't that correct, Carol?
Actually, let me read it to you. The 8th member will be a non-voting member and will be a person with a degree in social work with experience in social service administration. So it leaves it open, that they could be either retired or currently serving in a social work capacity or with experience at some point in their life. But they do have to have a degree in social work.
Okay.
And that's how it's written right now. So that's why we're talking about it, because if we want to change this, then it would take a vote of the board and then it would go to city council for approval.
Okay.
Um,
And
go ahead.
sorry, Megan, could you clarify, because you probably know more than I do, what would be the difference between someone that went through the Department of Sociology versus the School of Social Work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So often there are many folks that work in the field of social services that have degrees in psychology, child development, sociology. The difference in a social work degree is that it is it's a very practical degree in terms of you're learning a skill set that is related to working with individuals, whereas degrees like psychology, sociology, child development are a little bit more like academia, science based, like a research sort of track. Whereas social work, it is really like they're trying to teach you a skill set for engaging with individuals. And I think there are, again, many professionals that I work with on a daily basis that do the same type of, exactly the same work, same job description as what I do. Their degree is just not in social work. The thing that I would say that I think could be valuable for this board in terms of keeping it specific to social work is that social workers, even if you're not licensed, I am not a licensed social worker, but I have 2 degrees in social work. So I can't technically by the state of Texas call myself a social worker. I can't advertise myself as that. One thing that I will say about a social work degree is that even if you aren't licensed, you have a broad education on the code of ethics, the core values of the profession that are really kind of driving forces around best practices in the work that I think folks maybe coming from other fields don't necessarily have that full breadth of knowledge on. I can tell you that in my professional career, in my paid job, we often, like I said, hire folks that don't necessarily have a social work degree, but in the job description, it'll say that they're held to the code of ethics of social workers. So it really is sort of the industry standard to meet these kind of requirements, which would be my push for if we were to hold this non-voting member to maybe keep it with somebody who has a degree would be my recommendation would that it would be social work specific. I thought it was valuable to bring up the conversation just because, like I said, I've been unsure of how to be in this role. And I think it could really help shape the future of this board for this role to have a little bit more direction on what is their intent and how can they best support the board moving forward. So
I have a question. So if am I on? Yeah, okay. So if the social worker was a voting member, would they also be detailed with rating and decision-making, like the rest of us? It would be the same thing, the same role. Correct?
Correct. Right. Anyone who votes would need to go through the same exact process.
Yeah, the same process, the scoring, all of that. Okay,
Yes.
all right. So,
I will also add, I think that if the board decides to allow this person a vote, that it would be really valuable to recruit somebody who does not professionally work in San Marcos. Because I don't think a conflict of interest form would necessarily capture it, because I think conflict of interest is specific to exchange of money, if I'm understanding that correctly. Whereas like professionally, I engage with so many of the nonprofits that that apply for this money, but I don't work for them. But there's a professional relationship there, whether it's formalized via an MOU or not. If I were to have ranked some of those organizations, there's something that's sort of compelling about the fact that then I have to tomorrow go potentially have a meeting with the same person that I just submitted a rating for. So I think that there
Yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Eleanor.
Yes, everything you're saying. It's different.
Yes.
Okay.
I
so
would
you're
say
saying a social worker that doesn't work in San Marcos.
I don't think we can do that. Can we, Carol, have a member?
If they
of this
lived in
board?
San Marcos,
Yeah,
don't you have
Live in
to be
San Marcos.
residents?
I was thinking that you do, yeah. Have to
Yeah,
be
you
a
have to be
resident
a
of San Marcos,
But you
to
don't
be
have
on
to
the board.
work
but you don't have to
here.
work here. Okay, okay.
You have to
Yeah.
what?
And so,
But
You
that
have
would
to
be
live
difficult.
here. You have
yeah,
to
just
live
to
here.
summarize, you have to live here in order to be on the board, period.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Okay,
have to be a
that's what I
resident of
thought.
San Marcos.
Okay,
That's what
I suppose we could narrow it down. It'll make it harder to find someone possibly. And I guess also just know that we can't really legislate who gets on the board. So if somebody else equivalent to Eleanor comes up and says, I'm interested in being on the board, this person who works in social work in San Marcos does bring a lot of valuable knowledge on the one hand, So I can see how city council would be like, of course she can be on the board because we want that depth of knowledge and a depth of knowledge about San Marcos even. So there's kind of good and bad on both sides of it. It really is. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Like, even if we legislate who the social worker position can be, we could still have somebody else on the board who's in the same position, basically.
The rating system is pretty, specific. So I'm not even sure a conflict of interest would play into that, because it's the point system is pretty specific. And I mean, I'm just going to go on. This is what I think. I would like there to be a social worker, and I think they should be a voting member.
Yeah. Can we be
if
that?
you have no vote, you have no say, you have no power, you have no, I mean, that's what I think.
Well, I have a
I
question.
see the benefit and of having a social worker on the committee, and I think they should be a voting member, and I don't think they're gonna, go off the deep end and, vote for something that, I mean, it's pretty cut and dry, the criteria for rating, so it doesn't matter, whether you work for them or not, and the input would be valuable. I mean, they know about the social work services that's available in San Marcos, and would have maybe a little insider information about some of the agencies even.
I understand what you're saying, Julie.
Yeah.
Is there anybody who thinks that we shouldn't have a social worker?
Megan, I have a question for Megan. Megan, last year, while we were talking about the organizations, how often did you feel like you needed to interject something and you just didn't, for whatever reason?
Oh, that's tough to say, to be totally honest. There have definitely been applicants that I have had professional experiences with that have been wonderful, that I would love to have said, like, wow, working with this organization has been great. And there have definitely been organizations that have applied for funding that I've had challenges professionally in navigating client services with. And so, to be honest with you, and there have been moments where I have really valued not feeling put in a position to have to say that, because it could impact my professional relationships. So yeah, I mean, I've definitely had opinions that I have not felt comfortable sharing, and have been grateful for the fact that I can sort of hide behind this role, because it's sort of been protective in that way. And I totally appreciate what you're saying, Gloria. I think there's value to that as well.
Well, of course. I mean, if you know something about an agency that could make it better, or that's a deficit, or that we could address, because all we have is what they present. I just can't see how that would not be a valuable piece of information.
I just don't think it's very protective of the individual that's in the role. I just think you're putting that individual in a vulnerable position in their professional life to have to score and rank colleagues that they then work with on a professional level.
So do you think it should be a non-voting thing?
I think it is valuable. The reason that I thought it was important to bring up is because I have had a hard time knowing what is valuable, how I can contribute to the board. And so I think continuing on with the non-voting member would be helpful, but creating some clear expectations for how that person can support the board.
So you're saying you think it should be not voting?
I do, yes.
Really? I'm surprised. Okay. Because again, the point system is, pretty cut and dry. But I mean, you think it should be non-voting? Run that by me again. Why do you think it should be non-voting?
Because I think that it's protective of the professional that's in the role. Eleanor, I mean, she spoke to this as well as somebody who works in social services in San Marcos for the Hays County Food Bank. And then she has professional dynamics in her role at the Hays County Food Bank with other applicants. And it's on public record how you vote for them, how you score them. And so then in her personal life, she's serving on this board. Sorry.
Oh, okay, I get it. Okay, now I
But
get
in her
it.
personal life, she's serving on this board, but then professionally in the business hours, she has these relationships with the applicants.
All right, okay. All right.
So
I
Megan,
understand that.
sorry. So for clarification, I see where you're coming from, but again, the mechanism of conflict of interest. Carol, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe on the City of San Marcos conflict of interest, you can indicate not just because of funding conflicts, but because of personal relationship conflicts, because I filled that out for one of the organizations where I have worked very closely with them in a different aspect. But according to Robert rules, you can always, you don't necessarily have to approve or oppose a motion. You could also abstain where you don't vote at all. So with that mechanism of being able to abstain, would you still feel vulnerable if you were in a voting position?
I just don't know how valuable it would be to the board, because I think there would be a lot of moments of someone abstaining. Because in my professional role, I refer clients to the food bank. I refer clients to St. Vincent de Paul, to the Salvation Army, to Southside Community Center, to Community Action. I work for Community Action, but you see what I'm saying? Like, there are just, depending on the client population that you're serving, at any given time, I could be referring clients to any one of these applicants.
Okay.
I just think that it would just be so much of that abstaining piece that I don't know how valuable it would be to the board for that person to even have a vote at that point.
I'm wondering if this is the same dialogue that they had when they made the decision to have a social worker, but they be non-voting. And so I don't know if everyone's ready to vote, or if anyone has any other anything else to say.
According
I have a question for Carol. Carol, how do you feel this wrong?
Back here.
If we voted to have can you hear me? Okay, Carol, how could you feel this role?
So so will you go ahead and mute, Mary? Sorry, we hear an echo.
It's not me, but go ahead and answer my question. How could you
Okay,
feel
sorry.
it?
Go out there somewhere.
Okay, we got it. Okay, so I don't have a degree in social work or anything close to it. I have a degree in public administration, which is just completely different. And I have a degree in planning, which has to do with zoning and that sort of thing. And so really there's no one who works for the city who has a relative experience or a degree like social work.
Okay, my other question, Megan, and I'm not trying to just jab you with questions though, but I want to know, what you were experiencing while you were sitting in that chair, because we didn't ask you a lot of questions. And I mean, I felt like you wanted to say a lot of things, but then I felt like you weren't comfortable interacting with the rest of the board based on what we were saying. And that is a difficult position to be in. The closer we got to the end and making decisions about money and things like that, now we're talking about dollar bills. So we've gone past what the organization has done in the past in their presentation and that kind of stuff. And I think everybody on this board, I feel from my perceptions, really has a clear understanding of their role on this board. So, I think having you over there, actually, you didn't serve a purpose. You really didn't, because you didn't interject when you wanted to, for whatever reason, and only you knew that. So I'm wondering if we really do need a person, a social worker over there that's going to be, and I'm not saying you're non-affected, does not feel or that she can interject or he can interject when they hear something that they know is not right or not totally right, or they want to add something to it. I mean, I don't think it's fair for that person. And then if we brought a social worker, on the board, then would it be that we felt like we should go with the social worker all the time because they would be seen as the expert because they have that title as a social worker, where I think everybody on the board, you can see if you don't, I think is well versed in what this board exists for. So, you know, having the social worker or not having the social worker, I think we kind of set the social worker up. Because I'm about being honest. If I have an opinion, and I think I'm right about something, I'm always willing to listen. But if I know for a fact a social worker is not going to change my mind about what I think about whatever we might be talking about, if I know factually and it's there in black and white, and we know just by knowing the organization and how it operates in our community, a social worker is not going to change my mind. I just don't think we should waste time having somebody sit over there who is an expert and can contribute, but doesn't feel like they can or don't feel comfortable doing it. So, I mean, I could go either way, but I'm thinking about the social worker and really what that role is going to mean and how it's going to be impacted on this board. Are we going to be put in a position where we have to always go with what the social worker says?
We've never been put in that position before.
Well, that's because we haven't had a voting social worker. We've never had a voting social worker, but Megan was over there, I'm sure, with a lot to say, but not knowing when to interject or if she could, or were we going to be open to what she was saying. So I just see it kind of as a setup, you know, person that we may not really, and this is my perspective. Do you understand what I'm saying, Megan?
I do. And I think everything you're saying is a big part of why I thought it was valuable to have this conversation, because I don't think that the way that the board currently operates is best utilizing this role. And I don't think it's currently setting this person up to be a valuable asset. I do think that there is a lot of potential for this role to be a valuable asset. And absolutely, Mary, I think you're right that all the individuals that are currently on this board do seem very knowledgeable about San Marcos. My thought is more thinking about like, these roles won't be filled by these individuals for long, right? We've got term limits and things. And so how can the board best set up future education and information for the individuals that will fill these roles? I'm not thinking necessarily about you folks here. I'm thinking about future iterations of the board that may not necessarily be as familiar with the services here or what the standard practices are. And so I think that this could be a valuable role if we found ways to utilize it as a resource in terms of like, I have ideas about how this person could get a presentation to the board at the beginning of the session about some basic things around the profession, best practices, things like that. And I think that could be valuable as then you move into hearing presentations. But I hear everything you're saying, Mary.
I like the whole idea of maybe bringing that social worker on in the beginning, and then having the training or having that social worker give us an overview about what social services are and how the social services role is playing into what we're just about to do. And then maybe bring them back again, you know, after each phase for questions. I mean, we don't always have something for the social worker to answer.
I agree. I think we should maybe under Article 3, where it does outline the non-voting members' duties, we could add a training or outreach to the committee. And then something I was just thinking that I've used in my past is where we use consultants, but they don't attend the meetings. They're just in the background. And then what we would do is the committee would draft any questions they had that they wanted the consultant to answer, and then through one point person, they would relay that to the consultant, and then that person who is relaying the information to the consultant would come into the meeting and then give the responses that the consultant had, or the consultant, if was available, could attend the meeting and answer the questions directly. And maybe that would reduce some of that vulnerability that Megan may have felt, where if it was recorded in our meetings, it has her face and it's open records as we've discussed, but there could be personal consequences to her if someone were to take it out of context by going back to recordings, and someone would just state something that she said out of context, and there could be personal or professional consequences to that non-voting member. But if they can be consulted outside the meeting, but then it's recorded in the meeting of what the responses were, maybe that's a way we can incorporate. Still working with open records. I don't know. It's just an idea being thrown out there.
So we really can't do it that way. It really does. Any consultations where the board is receiving advice and so forth as a board need to be in an open meeting where the public can hear it at the same time. But one option is like what Mary was saying, if you wanted to have somebody come and give a presentation and not necessarily even be a member of the board, you know, that's another option that gives you that sort of consultation, the consultant role without them being a member of the board. We would just invite a social worker to come give a presentation and then they'd come back, you know, in different phases. That's another option. I'm totally neutral. I just wanted to bring up that we really can't consult outside the meeting and then record it in the minutes. We just can't. Yeah.
Well, now I'm thinking that, you know, there would be value in a non-voting social worker that would, yeah, that would have a kind of, this has been my experience dealing with this particular nonprofit, or, you know, this is my experience in trying to get a client assistance with this particular nonprofit, or, you know,
so I would have to stop you there too. I cannot, I can't see.
Okay.
Like, I don't know. It would be one person's opinion. And so if a member of the board, as they are putting forth their vote and they're like, I am voting low on this organization and here's why, that's one thing. But if we're asking anyone to state an opinion about a specific organization, that is really dicey. That really opens up another whole can of worms of like public slander. I don't know. It just sounds like you really don't want to go there.
But
well, I don't know. I don't think that's the right word to
that's
use.
a little rough.
But well, I mean, I'm just telling you, it would open up another whole can of worms.
No,
I don't
see you.
I don't see
I
how
what you're saying. I see
we
what
could
you're
ask
saying.
someone to do that.
I
So
agree.
the social worker's role specifically is to advise on general matters.
General
to
matters such as,
Yeah,
give
like-
me an example. Maybe if I had an example.
So to be able to say, it is very typical in applying for money in this profession to have to be scored, for the applications to be scored. Because, for example, before this year, this board didn't score the applications. And so the social worker can come to y'all and say, actually, what the typical practice is in this field is that when we apply for money, we go before a scoring system in each grant that we apply for. So this is a normal practice that y'all are putting into place. It's that type of information about social work.
I'm not sure where their expertise in social work would play into that, because that's what we do anyway. You know, I mean, I'm not sure what contribution a social worker would make if they're not able to
Can I give you another?
discuss any of I'm not sure what contribution they would make then.
So another example that could contribute to sort of something like what Carol is talking about, you know, in this like information sort of sharing, informative session that I'm suggesting. And I think the idea of bringing in like maybe a social, I mean, we have Texas State here, what a great resource. We could tap into a Texas State professor to come give the same type of informational presentation that I'm kind of describing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a non-voting board member. I think that's a valuable recommendation that Carol made. But in giving sort of a presentation about the field, there are other things that this person could bring. They could talk about best practices in terms of the way we talk about clients. We use person first language, meaning we don't say a disabled person. We would say a person who experiences physical disabilities, right? When instead of saying a homeless person in the field, we would say something like a person experiencing homelessness. Things like that. I mean, and that's just one little example that came to mind, but that's definitely a practice that is valuable. That if you then hear an applicant using certain language to describe a population that they work with, you've already heard from the social work presentation that that's not best practice in the field, that the way that we talk about and treat clients has a certain standard. So that's one example. I don't know if Eleanor.
Yeah, but we don't deal with individual clients. We deal with
But-
agencies.
And I'm talking about when
using the politically correct language, I'm not sure how, you know.
Well, I think it speaks to the quality of services that an agency provides. So when they're giving a presentation about their services,
uh-huh.
listen for that's one example that came to mind, but you can listen for the way that they're talking about the clients that they work with. And it is an indication of the quality of services that they provide if they're using industry standard language that views the person holistically and in a valuable way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay,
make
so you're
sense.
talking about the input they would have would be how the agencies present and
To some
and
extent, the way that they
describe
talk.
how they're helping the individual client.
Correct. I think getting an idea of what standards, the way that services should be provided in a way that is ethical and to standard with the social work expectations of the profession, it can sort of give you something to listen for when you hear agencies talk about the services that they provide. It's not really about political correctness. It's about the quality of services. Again, that's just one example that came to mind.
Okay, well, I mean, you're the social worker, and if you think that that's a valuable role, but they should be a non-voting member, you know, I think whatever you think has more validity than what I think. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I think that there have been some valuable points though made by, you know, Mary talked about like, it could feel a little superfluous to have this person at every single meeting feeling like they can't speak. But it also could be valuable if there are questions that come up. I think that this role hasn't really felt valuable necessarily to the board because we haven't really known how to tap into the resource.
Right.
So
I mean, and we could certainly make it a point to say, you know, let them have, you know, the pulpit and say, well, what do you think? You know, to actually ask for their input on major decisions, or certainly if there's a back and forth about certain decisions, you know.
Right, and we've had that happen before. And
like
we've
a
also
tiebreaker or
had,
something, I don't know.
yeah, we've had that happen before, and we've also had social workers come in and just kind of let us, kind of steer us in a way to where our voting process was a little easier.
Yeah,
Kind
or
of what to look
changed,
for.
I mean,
Yeah.
Sure.
So I think their position is very valuable on this board. And I think that's the reason that they have the position on the board. I guess it's up to us to vote unless anybody else has anything else to say. Melina or Alfreda, did y'all have anything to add or any questions to ask?
I just wanted to say I agreed with you and Megan. I do think it's a valuable position, and I also think that it should be non-voting, just to help with, the not affecting their personal or private lives. But yeah, I do think it's valuable, and I think we should keep it for the board.
Okay. And Melina, did you have anything to say? You're muted.
What everybody else is saying, but also if it's possible to find somebody who doesn't have current ties with the organizations that are applying, I guess. I don't know, that's probably too much to ask, like Carol said.
Yeah.
Asking for something as specific as that, or changing where you're gonna have to live, is gonna narrow the applicants. But I could see how saying too much could affect your working relationships, and that's huge. But on the other side, if you had past relationships or something and you'd be willing to, you know what I'm saying? If you're in a different position, I guess, in your life, and you could share past experiences, or that would be vital. But I mean, that's a lot to ask for. So it's one of those things that could be really, really helpful if we knew how to, I guess, use the person, and if the person was the perfect person. You know what I'm saying?
And we've had some good social workers. We have that didn't try to sway us, but just wanted to make things, if they saw that we were struggling with something, then they would chime in and try to make that
Well, it's
that decision
information.
easier for us.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's just information.
exactly.
Information is never wrong. If it's actual information and not an opinion.
And
or
anybody
bias.
applying for this position or putting in for this position, I'm sure that they'll kind of know what they're getting into and know that we have questions, or know that, their opinion is going to be valuable some way. I'm sure that they're not going to come in as a novice and just not know what this position is about. So with that being said, Carol or anyone, can we go ahead and vote? Will this be a two-part vote or a one-part vote, to where we're going to vote to have a social worker and non-voting member and just keep it as is, but maybe redefine what their expectations are, like give a presentation or just put something else in writing? The bylaws.
Better define their role, but keep
Better
them as
define their role.
Yeah.
Or
I
just keep
like
it
that.
open like it is. I mean, we can vote to have a social worker, non-member, and then come back and work on a more clear definition. Because I like a lot of the things that Monica and Megan were suggesting, and maybe we can put that in writing, just as guidelines. When they do look at the position, they'll know more of what they're getting into.
Okay, so as far as voting goes, you'll need someone to make a specific motion.
Okay,
So the motion can say whatever it is they want it to say.
okay,
What the ordinance says right now is it's a person with a degree in social work with experience in social service administration, and that they'll be a non-voting member. So however anybody wants to phrase the motion
okay.
is fine. And you can just, you can phrase it to keep the same wording that's in the ordinance now, or you can phrase it differently, however you want to, but make it a specific motion. Yeah.
Well, you will correct me if I'm wrong, please. I make a motion to keep a social worker on the board for the Human Services Advisory Board as a non-voting member, but I also make a motion to clarify their duties or on the board, make it a little bit more clear.
As
I
to the
think the
role.
way it's written is more vague, and I would like to make it more clear by interjecting suggestions that Monica and Megan made. Can I have a motion and a second regarding this recommendation?
Okay, so Joanne,
Just to
I
make
thought
it a
you-
discussion?
yeah, so you just made a motion.
Okay,
I think that the chair can move, so you
Okay.
can make a motion. So
Okay.
we could keep that as the motion, and then the question is there a second? And then after that, y'all can discuss.
okay, so I did make that motion, so do I have a second?
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
Second.
Okay. And then, and I guess we'll take a roll. Carol, will you please call the roll to vote on this? Is that how we do?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, yes. Okay, so we'll start with Mary,
Yes.
Monica.
Approve.
And if y'all could say aye, then I can hear it easier. Sorry.
Okay, I'm-
Aye.
So far I got two ayes. Okay,
Okay.
I'm sorry, y'all. Okay, Alfreda,
Aye.
Eleanor,
I,
Melina,
I,
Gloria,
Aye.
and then of course Joanne is, I guess, go ahead and say it.
Aye.
Okay, so we have all ayes. And so then, just to coach you a little bit, you already know this, I think, then the call is for discussion. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, is there any discussion? And I think in the discussion to include just a clear definition of what, understanding of what Monica and Megan were saying about the presentation, and just a little bit so more information included in this, so that when they see this, they just, I'm a non-voting member social worker, that's all I know. But to know their role with a little bit more definition would, I would feel, make me feel more comfortable and help me to make a decision if that's what the role I want to play.
So just to be really specific, see if this,
Specific.
I hope this doesn't confuse things, but the duties of the non-voting member are they're going to be in the rules and regulations of the board. Having the social worker and having them as a non-voting member is in the ordinance. And so if y'all could go ahead and vote on, let me see is there any discussion? Okay. Oh, shoot. Now I'm confused. Okay. You just voted on
We just voted on
the motion.
to have a non-voting social worker.
Okay.
Voted on that.
Okay. So what I'm understanding, let me clarify,
Okay.
there's no change to the ordinance. And so
We-
that's what y'all just voted on.
As far as it being a non-voting social worker.
Social worker.
Correct.
Okay, so then we can stop there.
Okay.
Like that completes item number 1 on the agenda. And then, I'm sorry, y'all. Okay, and then because nothing changed, we don't have to discuss item number 2. You would just want to read it and say there's going to be no discussion because nothing changed.
Okay. the
And then we
next
could
item-
go on to item number 3,
Okay.
which is rules and regulations. And that's where we could have the discussion and add to the list
Okay. I
of
see
what
you're saying.
the social worker does.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll read number 2 and just say, okay. The next action item is to discuss and take action on recommendation and resolution 2022-02RR to consider adopting the city standard board and commission bylaws by the Human Services Advisory Board with any changes recommended by the Code of Ordinances. This item was placed on the agenda in case we needed to make changes to the standard board and commission bylaws by the Human Services Advisory Board. Carol, do we need to make any changes to the standard bylaws?
Okay, and so we
No.
don't,
Okay.
because the discussion you just had did not lead to any changes to the bylaws.
Okay, and can I make, okay, so we don't need to make
So
any motions on
keep
there.
going.
No discussions,
Right.
okay. And the next action item is to discuss and take action on resolution 2022-01R to create rules and regulations for the Human Services Advisory Board. We will now receive a brief presentation by Carol Griffin, Housing and Community Development Manager, on creating rules and regulations on the Human Services Advisory Board, followed by a staff facilitated discussion of each section. I will turn the floor over to Carol. Now, Carol, is this where we will discuss what was discussed earlier?
It
As far
is,
as
and so if,
amending? Okay,
if y'all want to turn to the 4th tab in your binder. Just really briefly, I can orient you to the process. So under the 4th tab, first of all, there's a document that has all these red lines through it. So what we did was I crossed out everything that's now in the bylaws. So in the new bylaws that y'all approved last week, that are the standard bylaws for the boards and commissions, they take care of all the pieces that are crossed out. And then you have left over the parts that need to be made into this particular board's rules and regulations. And in order to make it clear, and I hope it does, or if it doesn't, we can discuss it a different way. If you flip 3 pages, I made a clean draft with just the parts that need discussion. So if you look, it says page 1 of 9. So are y'all with me where it says rules and regulations of the Human Services Advisory Board of the City of San Marcos? Well, all this is the sections taken out of your prior bylaws and put into a format so we could see it cleanly without all the stuff that was crossed out. And so under membership, this section 1B is where it talks about the role of the non-voting member, and y'all are welcome to jump into the discussion right there. And then what I was thinking we could do is go through each section. So the next one will be staff liaison, the next one will be board records, and just kind of walk through each section and have a discussion on whether or not anything needs to be changed. Because what I've done is pull this wording straight out of the document that you already had, basically. So with that, I think I should turn the floor back over to you, Joanne, if you
Okay.
want.
okay.
It's either way. I can sort of be the facilitator, or you can, but we
You
could have
can.
that discussion. You want me to? Okay, that way
Yeah,
it frees
you
you.
don't
It kind of
mind.
frees you up. No, I don't mind at all. Kind of frees you up. So let's talk through the role of the non-voting member. And so if you see where it says page 1 of 9, and I'm looking in the membership section, it says role of the non-voting member, review all funding applications, serve as a resource board person for the board. And it has a list of the current roles for this particular person. Does not perform site visits, does not participate in the discussion of the allocation of funds, but will be available for the board if questions arise. And that is the sum total of what the current social worker has to go on about what they can do. So if y'all want to put in that the social worker will do a presentation at the beginning of the process and put some conditions in of what should be in that presentation, or anything else you want to change about the role of that social worker, then this is the place to do it. And we could just write it in.
And Megan, that's where you come in, because I like what you said about the presentation. And can you kind of walk us through that quickly as to what bullet points we should put down for that they're going to see?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say a brief overview of the social work core values and code of ethics. I would say best practices in the field related to service delivery. And then I would also say an overview of industry standard related to grant funding applications would be my recommendations. And I don't think, just in as you kind of support this new person coming into this role, I don't think they need to go exceptionally in depth in terms of code of ethics and core values, but I think just providing a general overview of what they mean, how they drive the profession, and how they're applied could be really valuable to inform what it looks like to provide services.
So then it would be just a brief presentation regarding, okay, I got it.
Yeah, I think that I guess I meant specifically the piece that could be brief is the core values in the code of ethics, because you can get real caught in minutia with those pieces. There's, a long list of core values and ethics, but providing an overview of that piece. And then I think they can also talk about best practices in the field related to service delivery, and industry standard practices related to applying for grant funding. And I think those were the only things I said. So the code of ethics and core values, best practices in the field related to service delivery, and then industry standard practices regarding grant applications and funding. Eleanor, just to chime in, do you feel like that captures things that you in your?
No, I think that's good. And yes, the part about kind of grant funding and the process of writing grants and applying for grants, just kind of a brief summaries, because if you've never done that before, then I think it's just good to have a little bit of information and background about the process.
Especially when we have new members on the board and they've never done this before. And we're asking them to make these type of decisions. So yeah, I think that would help out.
Megan, would you feel that it would be beneficial for future non-voting members if we specify which code of ethics? As you mentioned, different disciplines have different codes of ethics, such as journalism has a different set versus psychology, and as you said, social workers can be from different disciplines. So maybe specify the code of ethics, social work code of ethics versus keeping it a broad term of code of ethics. Would that be beneficial?
Yeah, so if you're getting somebody that has a social work degree, the language of core values and the social work code of ethics is something they'll be very familiar with, but you could that's a great idea to specify it. You could, Carol, you can help me out with the way that it could be professionally worded, but you could refer to the NASW, the National Association of Social Workers, core values and code of ethics. That's a great clarification. Yeah, it would be through the NASW. They're the ones that publish and maintain all of those things.
Okay. Under the non-voting members, it's talking about record keeping. What type of record keeping were you doing, or you foresee the future non-voting member doing? Should that be more specific? Because that seems pretty vague, record keeping.
I agree. It is vague. What's helpful sometimes about vague, though, is that as things arise and things change, there's space to sort of create there. Carol came in.
Examples?
I'm sorry?
Maybe we should just specify some examples and then just say as assigned by whoever. Like, I don't know. I'm just kind of trying to get it a little bit more specific, but keep it open.
Sure.
What do you think?
I'm having a hard time coming up with some examples, but I hear what you're saying.
Well, and just to contribute, because we're talking about record keeping, I don't really know how we would use the social work position to help with record keeping. It is vague. If you wanted to add assigned by someone, you could always say as requested by the chair, something like that. Just to leave it open, or we could always strike that item, or we could just leave it there vague so that we can use it in some creative way down the road. That's some options.
As assigned by the chair would be, unless we just don't want it there at all. But what type of record keeping have you been keeping, Megan? That's what I'm saying. So as
Yeah.
assigned by the chair would just let them know that, you know, unless we ask them to keep certain records, there's really no records really to keep because everything is recorded, everything is, yeah. How about if we
Yeah.
just delete that? So we don't, it's up to y'all, but.
You know, I was initially in thinking about the vagueness of that piece. I was sort of thinking about supporting the city staff and like the development of like the rubric and all of that. But I think that that's really captured in the other pieces there. In terms of the drafting, the performance measures, and an evaluation process. So I don't agree. I don't know if it's even necessary to keep the
I don't
record.
think it's necessary to even have it. Yeah.
Okay, so we could go ahead and strike that unless somebody objects. I'll just go ahead and remove that part.
Okay. And Monica, did you have anything else to add? Where is she? Is she there? I don't see her. I was wondering if Monica had anything to add to what it, to the, is the only thing that we're adding is the presentation and striking the record keeping.
Well, one thing that I believe it was Monica who brought it up, so I'll go ahead and bring it up too. One idea was to, and or maybe it was Gloria, to have a specific request of the social worker at each meeting, just to say, just to bring them into the conversation. Do y'all want to have just an open question of social worker? Do you have anything you'd like to say at this point, or some points to contribute? That was just another idea that had been thrown out.
Yeah, I like that. Could we also leave it open that if Monica or Megan have any more suggestions on this, like when this meeting is over, if they can maybe email you?
How about if
Yeah.
anybody has any suggestions, or they think of something later on, Joanne, that they could send it in? How about if anybody thinks of anything, they could later send it in for consideration? Okay.
And that'd be fine. What we could do is, it's already 8:12. I think we have several other sections we're gonna need to talk through. So on this one, we could, if y'all don't mind, give a deadline of like, okay, by, it depends on what you want to do. I'll have to think it through. So by Thursday evening, if we had anybody's suggestions, I know that's not a lot of time, we could include them in the board packet for everybody to look at. Now, if you want to give each other, if you want to give each other more time, that is totally fine too. We would just have a red line, like a list of suggestions that maybe rolls into a different week.
Thursday's fine with me. Is Thursday fine with everyone, or do you need more time? Mary? Alfred? Monica, you need more time?
That
Okay,
was good, Carol. It's fine with me.
all right, just making sure.
Okay. 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 So with that, do y'all, and so I'm just trying to facilitate the conversation. are y'all ready to go forward? Well, let me back up. Okay, in this same section for membership, there's the role of the voting members. So we should just briefly visit that. Review all funding applications, perform site visits as required, discuss and determine funding recommendation provided to council. This leaves in site visits as an option. Right now, we don't have them as part of the process. You can include that as an option or just strike it. It's really up to you. I don't know if there's any discussion needed on this part, I guess is my thing.
To include it as an option, like a non-pandemic option, or?
Right, or just, I mean, I can tell you that as staff, we recommended that you not do site visits, that instead you have the agencies come to do the presentations. And that was so that all the board members hear all the same information all at once. And it provides that interaction with the board for the agency as well.
Okay, so just nix the site visits.
We could just strike it if y'all are ready to do that. We can leave it in there if we need to. I didn't want to sway it too much, but that's the reason why we changed it this year. And that would always be our recommendation, is that we stick with having the agencies present. So I guess my specific question is, do y'all want to strike that?
It worked out well last year. I'd say we strike it.
And you can revisit these rules and regulations annually as a board. And so if for some reason you want to bring it back, we can. So I'm gonna, and just like, let me know if there's any conversation on it. I'm gonna go ahead and strike it. And that will also be in your board packet as, here's what we've talked about so far. Read it through and see what you think. Okay, so moving on to staff liaison. So this role is my role. And I guess what I would say is, for staff liaison and board records, for those two sections, are there any discussion? Because the presumption is now you've already looked at it, you've already read through this. Does anyone have discussion on either of those two sections? And so then if not, we can go on to meetings, rules of conduct. Section 1, I would strongly recommend that we change that first sentence, because it says the regular meeting of the Human Services Advisory Board will be on the second Tuesday of each month at 5:30 p.m. We can leave that open. So what I would recommend is that it could be,
I think you had suggested that the board will meet as needed to fulfill its duties.
that's what the ordinance now says, because y'all, well, it will after council approval. What this could say as the rules and regulations, if you want to leave something in, it could just say the regular meetings of the Human Services Advisory Board will be approved on the annual calendar by the board. So I'm not seeing discontent with that. I'll go ahead and put that in the write-up, and we'll see what we think next week.
Sounds good.
Okay. And then the next sections are all very typical of running a meeting. It talks about the role of the chair and the vice chair and so forth. Does anybody have any other discussion that they wanted to bring forth on the rest of this section? Okay, and then we'll roll right into the Human Services Agency definition. So that is something that's not contained in the bylaws or any other place. So we needed it right here so that y'all can rely on it. Is there any discussion about that Human Services Agency definition? This defines which agencies are eligible to receive funding. That's the most basic rule of eligibility. Okay, so we'll keep going.
I was going to suggest, should we clarify it
Oh.
should be a nonprofit?
Please.
We can, and let's see.
Because it just says human
No.
aid services agency, but maybe specify nonprofit human services agency.
Okay,
I like that. Yes.
we could do that.
Yes.
Please.
Nonprofit. Let's see, a nonprofit human, I put it in the wrong place. Okay, got it.
Do we want to clarify the 501c3 status? I mean, there's different types of nonprofits. That's one tax code that's
Mhm.
related to human services.
Yes, I agree with you.
Okay, so 501c3 is a social aid services agency. A church, on the other hand, is a different,
Mhm.
it's like 501c2 or something like that. I can get more information on the different tax code definitions if we need it. Otherwise, if we leave it nonprofit, that just means that it can't be a for-profit.
Okay.
Mm.
It would leave it very open. That is not a tax code definition. Nonprofit just means that you're not in it to make profit for your owners.
I would
Can
say
we
just
then
leave it at
add an
nonprofit.
eligibility criteria, and then that would would further drill down what we mean by nonprofit, where we can specify the tax codes and any other criteria that we are going to require to consider them eligible.
You definitely can. Like, you can either put it here or you
Mhm.
can put it in, if we add the eligibility requirements,
Mhm.
like right now, those are not part of your rules and regs. If we add the eligibility requirements, then y'all can specify which parts of the tax code you want them to be under and that sort of thing.
I would suggest we add a section, like you have one called funding requirements on page 5. Maybe
Mhm.
adding a subsection that would say eligibility requirements.
Okay. So we can definitely talk about that in more detail. And
Okay.
I can bring information on the tax code. We'll include it in your packet.
Okay.
Let me make a note. Okay, got it. Okay. Now, just to bring it up, it is 8:20. The next section, I have several recommendations. It is just really outdated. It's called the funding application process. We can certainly continue, or I can stop here and we can continue next week. It's really up to y'all. Do you want to keep going, or go ahead?
Well, I was just gonna say, I think that those of us that aren't continuing, don't our terms technically expire on the 28th?
They do. Actually, that's a good point to bring up. So the people who are no longer going to be on the board, the terms expire on February 28th. That means Eleanor Owen O'Shan and Megan Campbell will not be with us at the next meeting.
Wow.
So yes, so that's a heavy loss actually on both
Yeah.
counts.
Yeah.
Do y'all want to go ahead and get through some markup with that thought in mind? And then we could really just get through this page 4. And then next week, we could hold a meeting on March 1st if y'all want, because we already sort of had it set up on Zoom, or we can decide to have it later in March as well. So it's kind of
That is election day. I want to recommend that we not do it on the 1st.
and that's certainly something to consider. So we could happily move it to a different week.
Yeah.
And then, yeah. So,
Although- Early
sorry.
election, early voting,
yeah.
I know, right?
Yeah.
early voting.
So, but it's true that public meetings are not usually held on election day, just to give
Okay.
people, even city council doesn't normally meet on election
Sure.
day, just because people are involved.
No,
Um,
I get
Do
it.
you want to do it for the next, what is it, the next Tuesday or next Thursday?
if we could make it on a Thursday, it would be very helpful. And
I received
Let's
your,
see. I
your
have a calendar in front of me.
your email about moving it to
So,
Thursday. So what's the
yeah,
next Thursday? after
so
March
we
the
could do
1st?
it. So March 3rd would be the Thursday next week, or we could just make it the following week, which would be, I guess, March 10th, if I'm adding right.
Both would be okay for me. Do we want to go ahead and make that decision now? Just so,
We could.
What, I'm sorry, I didn't hear, what was it about, an email? Did I miss it?
So I sent out an email with a revised calendar. It actually wasn't from me. It was part of the board packet. And so everyone should have received the board packet last week that had a revised calendar in it.
instead of having the meetings on Tuesdays so that you could fulfill your duties for the city council, we'll have it on Thursday. Yeah, I
Yes.
received it. So does anybody have an objection to us having it on the 3rd or the 10th or which one?
I won't be here the 10th.
Okay. So is the 3rd okay with everyone?
Yeah,
I'm okay with the 3rd. Yes.
all right.
Okay,
So we'll come back on
we
the
will,
3rd.
we'll plan on that. Let's see. Do y'all want to go ahead and cover this page 4
Yeah,
while
Sure.
we're at it?
I don't have a problem.
Okay. Okay, let me tell you my recommendations. So section 1 says a funding calendar should be approved and available to the public after the first meeting of the new fiscal year. So that it will be, it's already planned that y'all will discuss the calendar at the next meeting. So that's great. Section 2 is quite outdated. For one thing, I would strike out where it says the first Monday in January. So it says funding applications are available to agencies. And then it says the first Monday in January and are due back to city staff on the second Friday of February. Okay, I would prefer that it said funding applications are available to the agencies according to the calendar adopted annually by the board. So that way y'all are setting the timing for the process, but it can flex, some each year.
No, I like that.
Okay, yeah, it just,
I
it
like
makes
that.
sense.
No, it's, flexible.
The next 3 items, A, B, and C, are all about paper applications, and we much prefer to have electronic applications. And so if we could just strike hand delivered or sent by certified mail, that will date stamp them and that will provide receipt if requested, all of that just should be struck, in my opinion. Then the other final change that I'd like to recommend is on letter E. It says staff will notify agencies of any applications requiring additional information and will allow 2 business days for which the agency has to fulfill the request. I would like to say at least 2 business days. I feel like 2 business days is just not enough time from our experience.
Right.
We can use that as a guideline, and as a minimum, but if we could have a little bit more time to work with the agencies to get information, I think it would work well for all of us.
Yeah,
So,
no, minimum of 2 business days, right.
yes, that's what it would say. So, do we have any discussion about these proposed changes? I'm basically saying like, this is what I'm recommending. I'm happy to draft it for you and sort of put it out there for y'all to discuss more next week. But if anybody has discussion now, it would be a great time as well.
I didn't know. I like that we have absolutely no late applications will be accepted. Had we referred back to this, we wouldn't have had so many discussions on late applications when we did. So, yeah.
This will make it very clear. And that way we won't be
Okay.
bringing to you anything. Like we were wishy-washy, like staff was wishy-washy on this one this year. And when we brought things back to you to consider, and really now we just won't do that. So,
Could we
okay,
add-
so
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry. Can we go ahead and add applications that meet all criteria criteria will be considered for funding?
Yes, ma'am. And the ones that stay in compliance with IRS. That'd be a nice adage as well.
I'm writing it down.
And I think adding that last part too, that stay in compliance from the time that we get your application to the time of your funding. I think that's very important as well. That way we won't have any butting heads with the city council.
Let's see, throughout the okay, and I'll try to word it well.
You know how to word it,
these are-
Carol.
Yeah, I'll work on that. These are the
Okay.
rules and regs for this board, and so we only can reach so far, but we will try to make that very clear. So,
Okay.
okay, yeah,
Thank you.
okay.
That will help us.
Maybe with the status could be clarified under eligibility. That's where we can
That
get.
Put
too,
it under
yeah.
eligibility, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good place for it. And
Yeah.
that we could, the eligibility criteria, we could put as a blurb into the city council packet.
Mhm.
Like,
I'm kinda
hey,
glad that-
remember,
Yeah,
these
I'm
are
kind of glad
eligibility
that that
criteria.
did happen because it shows us that, you know, their status could change at any time due to whatever they do or don't do. And so that will affect our, decisions to fund as well. So
Mhm.
that happened, I'm glad so that we can add something in there to really to protect us and to protect the decisions that we make, that we're following, whether we're literally following the rules, because that's what's stated in here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, the next part, I feel like is a little confusing. The ordinance says that if somebody is not going to be funded by y'all, they can file an appeal. And that is something that I think was a little bit hidden. We, as staff, didn't exactly go by this, I guess, but here's how it looks like it's supposed to work. I read through this today, and what it's saying is that the board will issue a preliminary recommendation that states, here are the agencies that are going to be funded and here are the ones who are not. And then if an agency is unhappy because they are not included on that list, they can file an appeal. So that's in the ordinance, and that would take a lot to change. We would have to go through a process and ask city council to change it and so forth. So I'm thinking we need to stick with having an appeals process, but changing the wording a little bit. So here's my suggestions for wording. It is totally up for discussion. Okay. Paragraph A, I would just strike notification letters. We all deal with electronic communications only now. So item B, I would strike letter and call it a notice. And then the applicant may then write a letter of appeal. Let's see, which is okay. And then state as stated in the notice. I would just replace letter with notice. I would go ahead and strike the next sentence. The submission of this letter will follow the same guidelines as the application, including a date and time stamped by the liaison. I think that that's still trying to follow paper submission rules, and we simply don't anymore. Like, we don't do that anymore. So I would strike that. And then I would leave the rest of it until it says in the last sentence of this page, after the appeals process is closed, the HSAB will proceed to discussion and determination of funding amounts for each agency. And then I would say, strike eventually. It would say rendering the final recommendation to the city council. So I didn't actually change that much, but where this would come into play is it changes your process just a little bit to where you're issuing that preliminary set of recommendations, and then people have time to file an appeal before your next meeting. So it'll show up on the calendar, actually. Does anyone have questions or discussion about that appeals process? So that's it for the page. So I can send y'all an updated version that has sort of the recommended changes in wording that we've looked at here. And then what I would recommend is then next week on March 3rd, we could start with page 5 of 9, which is all proposed new sections. So we would be adding new sections to the rules. Unless y'all want to continue, which we can also do.
No,
I know, right?
no. That's next.
At some
Thursday?
point, everybody's brain just, it
Yeah,
would be
man.
next Thursday, March
Next
3rd,
Thursday. Yes,
March 3rd, yes,
3 March, 7 PM, right?
yes.
Okay. I'm up for that.
Okay, well then, seeing no other discussion, I'm gonna go ahead and turn the floor back over to Joanne to continue down the agenda.
So are we on 4? And I'll just say that we've tabled it, or did we go to? No.
Oh, okay, so we are going to continue, the word would be continue, the discussion on item 3
Oh,
next week.
okay.
And then we'll take up item 4 next week separately. But I do want you to bring up item 5 because we're gonna just say thank you to our board members. So anyway,
Okay, so
Yeah.
we are going to continue March the 3rd. The next, section 3, the next action item to discuss and take action on resolution 2022-01R to create rules and regulations for the Human Services Board. We'll continue that. We will now, okay. We don't need a presentation from Carol. No
so
more.
we're gonna, skip
So-
item 4. We will, that one will happen next week on
So
the 3rd.
then, on item, okay, so item 4, we will just to discuss to take actions on resolution 2022-02R to approve the 2022 calendar for the Human Services grant application process that will take place on March the 3rd.
Correct.
Okay. And then the next item to be discussed on March the 3rd is to recognize board members with term expiring February 28, 22. But we can do that now, right? Because they won't be here for March the 3rd.
Right, exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
2 board members will no longer be serving as of March 1st, and we would just wanted to take a moment to recognize their contribution to the board over the past several years. Eleanor Owen Oshan and Megan Campbell both started on the board March 1st, 2019, and their term will end this year on February 28th. Can we take a moment to thank them for their services? And anyone can feel free to say something or give no applause. Okay.
Because
Thank you for your service.
the work.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, it seems like I've been on the board
As
with
they
y'all
say.
forever, especially Eleanor. Okay, it is now time to receive updates from board members on activities since the last meeting. Does any board member have an update for the group? All right, we'll move to the next item, which is future agenda items. Board members may provide requests for discussion items for a future agenda in accordance with the board approved bylaws. No further discussion will be held related to topic proposed until they are posted on a future agenda in accordance with the Texas Open Meeting Act. Does any board member want to request an item for a future agenda? Thank you. We will now move on to agenda item called question and answer session with press and public. This is an opportunity for the press and public to ask questions related to items on the agenda. Staff, is anyone present, person online or by phone, to speak to this agenda item?
No.
Thank you for your participation. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting? This motion was adjourned by.
I motion to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Eleanor. And second?
Second,
Okay, Gloria. All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
All against, say
Aye.
nay. Yeah, okay. All against, say nay. I will now adjourn this meeting at 8:38 PM.